You describe three kinds of citizens whom you call Hobbits, Hooligans, and Vulcans. What do you mean by that?
Sure. So these are meant to be sort of ideal types to kind of like make it easier to think about how people think and how they react. So if you've ever seen the Lord of the Rings movies, Hobbits, or if you read the books even better, Hobbits don't really care much about the outside world. They're not interested in adventure. They just want to sort of live their lives, have breakfast, their second breakfast, their 11sies and lunch, smoke their pipes and be on with it. And the political equivalent of that would be a citizen who doesn't have a firm or fixed ideology, doesn't have very many political opinions, doesn't pay much attention to politics, and as a result doesn't know much about politics, and doesn't really participate much. They just want to sort of lead their lives. And the average, say, non-voter in the US is a Hobbit so described. If you've ever been to, say, a soccer game in another country where people actually care about soccer, I've been to soccer games in Brazil and I've seen what it's like. You know that there are these sports fans who are just really rabid about sports. And when we look at how sports fans act, they tend to consume a lot of information. They know a lot about the teams. They can tell you about plays that took place 40 years ago in some game. They know stats off the top of their head. So they're very well informed, but they're also extremely biased. So take, say, Tom Brady and Deflategate. If you ask people in New England, is he guilty? They say, of course not. If you ask people in the rest of the country, they say he was guilty. I'm from New England, so of course I think he wasn't guilty. And that's the case where you're getting the same bit of information, but you're processing that information in a very biased way that just confirms your priors and makes your side look good. So you have these are high information, biased people. And the political analog would be a person who knows a lot about politics, but only consumes information that confirms their priors. They ignore, evade, or reject information that disconfirms it. They see members of the other political teams as rivals, whom they regard as stupid and evil. They participate a great deal, but they don't process information in a rational way. And frankly, that's kind of the other half of the American public. Vulcans I use sort of as an ideal type, where a Vulcan is supposed to be a dispassionate, rational person who doesn't have loyalty to his or her beliefs and is willing to give them up when new evidence comes in. And the reason I bring them up is not because I think there are a lot of Vulcans. It's not because I advocate the rule of the Vulcans, because I don't really think there are any. Rather, it's because I think other democratic theorists, when they're thinking about how democracy is supposed to go, what they have in mind is how it would work with Vulcans, when in fact what we have are Hobbits and Hooligans.
So my next question was going to be, but are there any Vulcans? It sounds like there aren't.
Well, some people are more Vulcanish than others. Some people, I think, try to do things that make them better behaved when it comes to politics. They frequently read things on the other side. They frequently try to get in the heads of people with whom they disagree. So there might be, I think some people come closer to that ideal than others. Like I'd say, just to name a name, like Jeff Brennan, not a relative of mine, but I think he's very Vulcan-like. But is anyone a pure Vulcan? Probably not. And the scary thing about this too, so one sort of test of whether you're a Vulcan is, can you explain other people's worldview in a way that they find amenable?
So which our friend Brian Kaplan calls the ideological Turing test.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, so the Turing test, for those who haven't heard of this, is supposed to be a thing where computers simulate being human, and if you can't tell the difference between communicating with the computer and communicating with a human, then it's supposed to be evidence that the computer is actually intelligent. So an ideological Turing test would be like that. Are you able to articulate and defend a position that's not yours in a way that people who advocate that position accept? They find amenable. They think that's a good description of what I believe. So Diana Mutz, who's a political scientist at Penn, wrote a really good book called Hearing the Other Side that investigates this kind of question, along with a few other questions. And here's something that she finds. If I ask you, okay, you're a Democrat, why would anyone be a Republican? And your answer is, oh, because they're stupid and they're evil. That predicts you participate heavily in politics, you give money to politics, you're involved in 3 or more causes, and you vote frequently, early, and often. If, on the other hand, you say, well, I'm a Democrat, but let me explain why smart Republicans would say what they say, and you can actually articulate their worldview, that predicts you don't really participate, you don't give money to causes, you kind of stay home. So it looks like what we have are the high information people tend to be sort of extremist true believers, and then we have a mass of hobbits who just sort of vacillate back and forth between different views and aren't very fixed. And the kind of ideal democratic citizen the dispassionate social scientist who's trying to reach compromise and figure things out is largely a myth. And insofar as we do have people like that, they're just not that into politics. They just don't participate that much.
Now, the message of Star Trek was that you don't want the Vulcans making the decisions. You want them advising a decision maker who brings more than pure rationality into the decision.
Yeah, I have to say, maybe gut reactions are really good when you're fighting Klingons in interstellar space. Um, I'm not so sure about that when it comes to, say, choosing monetary policy or trade policy. I think in this case we can look at people's guts and ask how well do the guts tend to do, and I don't think they do very well. I tend to agree with someone like Brian Kaplan and think, say, I use economic issues a lot because it's the thing I know the most about, and it's not that when we think about, say, trade policy and so on, it's not that the public understands the economist's point of view and rejects it because they find fault with it. It's that they don't even understand why economists would be in favor of trade in the first place. The complaints that they have, it's not that they've studied it and said, well, trade leaves these people behind and hurts them. They haven't studied that in depth. They don't really know what the stats are. They don't know how to test that. I think we're just biased to think of the world, say, in zero-sum terms. And I think maybe if I had to speculate, I'm guessing it's because of our evolutionary past. We spent so much of our history living in small family clans of 120 members or less, and we are not, in a sense, built cognitively for living in a large market economy. I think people don't understand that. I think they're inherently antipathic to foreigners, to people that are different from them. They don't trust them. They see interacting with them as dangerous. And that kind of mentality might have made sense if you're a small hunter-gatherer tribe 60,000 years ago. It doesn't make sense for our current world. I think we can't really trust our guts and our emotions. I think we have to trust our heads more.